Today on The Father Show, we are going to hear from an expert about parental alienation, how to recognize it, how you might be subjecting it onto your child, and signs to look out for. Stay tuned, because this is a show you don't want to miss. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining me here on The Father Show. And I'm your host, Mike Thompson. So today, we've got a great show for you. But before we get into that, if you have not subscribed to the show, please do and hit that notification bell so that you will be notified whenever we have a show. And that's generally every Tuesday. So, excuse me. No, I just changed that. So we'll upload a show every Saturday. So look out for them on Saturday mornings. And that's when I upload a new show. But hit that notification bell and you'll always be aware. But today, on our show, we've got Dr. Jennifer Harman, who is an associate professor of psychology, at Colorado State University. And she is also the president of International Council of Sharing Parenting. Her research focus over the last decade has been on the study of parental alienation, particularly on the power dynamics in family where it is occurring and in understanding how this form of family violence can be better prevented. So, ladies and gentlemen, without really any further ado, because I know this is a subject that is happens to a lot, and I want to make sure we can dive into it and really give it the time that we need. So I want to get right into it today. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to welcome Dr. Jennifer Harman. Jennifer, how are you doing? Or Dr. Harman, well. Excuse me.
That's right. I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
I really can't complain. It's been a great day. The weather is good. I'm above ground, so who am I to complain?
Yep.
So now I really want to dive into this because this is a subject matter that I personally have gone through. And I know a lot of men and women. So, audience, don't get me wrong. I know this works on both sides and it happens on both sides. But this is the Father Show. So we're going to be focusing on fathers. But tell me, or tell the audience, what is really parental alienation? What is the definition of it?
So parental alienation is when a child starts to reject or resist contact with a parent for reasons that aren't justified. And they've also aligned with their other parent. So the child essentially picks a parent that they kind of closely align with, and they become like partners or kind of us against the world kind of perspective. And they turn on the other parent, and their reasons that they give for why they're rejecting them are usually very trivial, exaggerated, or totally untrue. And so when we say parental alienation, we're talking about what happens to the child, right? That's an outcome that happens in the child. And there could be other reasons why a child would resist contact. But parental alienation refers to this particular type where it's because of something like the other parent hasn't done, right? They haven't done anything wrong and they have been influenced to feel this way.
Okay. And I think that's the key, is it? That the influence of another parent onto the child about the other parent.
Right. Yes. And that is one of the primary drivers.
Okay.
And it's not always the only cause, right? I mean, it's the
Right.
primary cause, but then other people, other things can like influence it and make it worse
Mm-hmm.
or better, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could, for example, have a parent that's acting very badly, trying to influence the child, and for some reason, the child could be very resistant to it. They could be very resilient,
Yeah.
which is, we
Yeah.
don't know a lot about those children, and we need to know more about them. It might be because they have still a lot of quality time with the other parent, like so they have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of parenting time, so that even though the other parent is influencing them, they're able to have a lot of time with the parent that they're being influenced to not like.
Yeah.
Um,
But and would the
and that's
age
the
be a
other
part
thing.
of that as well? Their age?
Oh, yeah, about 12 to 13, it seems that seems to be a very influential age for children.
Okay.
Teenagers, and you'd think that they would kind of be wiser, but no, we don't really find that. Uh,
Yeah.
they do engage in a bit more critical thinking because they're getting older. But if the alienation started when they were younger, they can't really kind of get out of that, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
hard for them to, because what happens is the alienating parent influences the child to see the world in very black and white terms. Things are either all good or all bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
They see things very polarized. And as they get older, that should, as kids should get better at that. They should understand that nobody's perfect, that the world isn't so simple and cut and dry. But a lot of alienated children, even as teenagers, aren't able to do that. Like
Mm.
they have a hard time understanding that. And there's psychological reasons why that happens. Um, and so teenagers can be very alienated, and in fact they will often embellish and make up more dramatic stories about why they've rejected a parent than a younger child would.
Hmm.
And so no, so I think it a lot depends on when the alienation starts,
Okay.
right? So when the behaviors of a parent really take root is really, I think, one of the driving factors.
So, to a parent behavior, could that be something that the kids experienced while the parent was married and they just didn't like the way the parent treated them?
Yes. So parental alienating behaviors can happen even in families that aren't divorced. And in fact, I even have students in my lab who are from China, and they say alienation is really common there, even though divorce is not very common.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but it's harder for them to leave a family in some countries and in some cultures, right? It's harder to get divorced, but it doesn't mean this doesn't continue to happen.
Yeah.
Um, and parents I've interviewed who have left a relationship often report that the alienation began long before they left.
Okay.
And it's usually kind of takes, and they didn't recognize it usually when it was happening. So, for example, the other parent might shut them out of bedtime stories. Would maybe go take the children and do things without the parent, like not invite them, undermine the other parent's authority in front of the
Mm-hmm.
children,
Mm-hmm.
make the kids think that that parent is not as good of a parent as the other one. Um, and and we can get into this more, but it's all part of a pattern of abuse, because
Yeah.
alienating parents are very abusive, and and they're psychologically abusive. And so when they use the children to do that, that's what we call parental alienating behavior. And so, um, but really, when we use the word parental alienating behavior, it's
Mm-hmm.
actually it's just a different term, and it's just a different name for coercively controlling behavior. It's the
Okay.
same thing. We just call it something different because um, people who study how it affects children, that's why we call it parental alienating
Yeah.
behaviors, because we look at how it affects kids. But a
And
lot of the
you,
domestic violence researchers don't do that.
yeah,
They study just the behaviors.
yeah. Now you mentioned some of the things that a parent will do to alienate the other family or the other parent. Uh,
Mhm.
what are some other tools that alienators do and use?
Oh, there's so many. So I think before I
Man.
answer that, I think it's important to remember that what's motivating the behavior is power and control. So anything that the parent could use to get more power and control or to keep holding on to it is what they'll use. And they'll use the most effective strategy that they can. Sometimes the strategy could be something as, well, it's not simple, but as simple as just influencing and guilting the child, right? So if the child says they miss their mom or dad, the parent would maybe get very quiet. And so it doesn't have to be a very direct influence. It can be very subtle. And then the kid learns like, oh, I can't talk about mom or dad to this parent because they're going to get upset.
Hmm.
And then they learn to hide their feelings. And then over time, when the parent is doing other behaviors on top of that, it can get very bad, right? The kid can start denying, or especially if they're made to feel like the other parent abandoned them or never loved them or is unsafe. Because what happens is the child who had a previously good attachment to this parent, who really loved this parent, is now getting a different message from that parent or their other parent that they never loved them, or that their feelings of safety with that parent, they are being told to question those. And and this leads to what we call a corruption of reality, where the child's memories become, they learn not to trust them. They learn not to trust their feelings towards the parent because they're being told something different, and but like a new, what we call a new narrative or a new story that's being told to them
Hmm.
about their childhood or what the parent did and didn't do. And so the kid starts to not trust their own feelings. And so like a lot of there's a lot of brainwashing that happens.
That's
There's a
right.
lot of interference with contact. So the parents, an alienating parent will try to prevent the alienated parent from talking to the child, from calling them, texting them, seeing them.
Hmm.
And sometimes if they're unable to do that on their own, they will, make an allegation of abuse that's not true. Um, I mean, and it's very sad when that happens, at least especially to me, because I've been on the receiving end of I've been a domestic violence victim myself, and when people make up like allegations of abuse,
Hmm.
it undermines the protections for people who really are being abused.
Right.
And so it's wrong to do that. And fathers do it too. Mothers and fathers,
Hmm.
they
Absolutely.
do this. So this isn't a gender thing at all, even though in the media they oftentimes like to make it seem like it is. I mean, in my research, we don't find that there's gender differences in who the alienating parent is. Moms and dads are just as likely to do it.
Yeah.
But we do see biases, though. It does come up when it gets to court. It comes up in perceptions of like when there's allegations of abuse,
Hmm.
where they are more likely to believe an allegation of abuse that a mother makes than if a father says it. So there are some gender differences there, but in terms of who manipulates children to hurt the other parent, we don't see any differences.
Yeah,
So
because I
there's so many more. There's so many more behaviors. I could go on and on and
oh
on.
I
Um,
I'm sure there are. And, what I really want the audience to really kind of recognize some of those tools that the alienator might use so that you can
mhm.
recognize it. So that's one of my other question is what how can you recognize it in your child that they have been put in that kind of position?
So there's two things. Okay. So first, you want to see the behaviors. Like if a parent does an alienating behavior,
Hmm.
it doesn't mean that they're necessarily alienating your children. So what we mean by an alienating behavior is its patterns of behaviors over time. So you would expect to see, for example, interference of visitation or communication and bad mouthing of you to other people and to the
Okay.
children.
Hmm.
And you might see an allegation of abuse that was later found to be not true. And you would find, the parent engaging in a lot of rewarding of behavior of the child for rejecting the parent.
Hmm.
And, so you would see all of these, and you would see it escalate maybe at certain times. So if you maybe have, let's say you start a new relationship,
Hmm.
then you might see these behaviors get worse
Yeah.
by the other
Because
parent.
that's one thing
Then,
that
yeah,
I tell parents is after
mhm,
you get divorced, if you and when you start a new relationship, keep it quiet. And it's really a couple of good reasons for that. One, you don't want
mhm,
your former spouse to know it. Two, the kids shouldn't be subjected to it in the first place at an early stage of your divorce or when you start dating someone, however long that has been that you've been separated. And but couldn't also, when some of the tools that parents use, can they be using it without even knowing it? Just saying
mhm,
simple things where, you know, that parent is stupid. That was a stupid
yep,
thing that your parent did.
yep,
And,
yep.
you
Oh
know,
yeah.
just some,
Nobody's perfect.
yeah,
People, even in the best of divorces, people or breakups, they're gonna say some things sometimes and not, they didn't behave, well. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily alienating their child. Most kids can tolerate most kids can tolerate that kind of stuff. And that's why it won't. It's not great. It's not great behavior for the child, but that's not necessarily going to lead to alienation.
okay.
This is why it has to be these patterns of abuse, right? There's more involved in the background, and it's consistent behavior. I mean, people are going to always say something offhand. A child might overhear you complaining to somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or you might get into an argument, at a exchange over something. That's not, or a parenting time exchange, but that's not going to lead to alienation per se. It just puts the child in a difficult position because it's not fun to see your parents fighting, right?
Yeah.
It's not fun to hear all that. But that's not the same as when we're talking about alienation. Alienation needs to be where the parent is doing a lot of these things and the child starts to align with them. And
Okay.
then, and even then, not all the children will become alienated.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, some are very resilient and don't do it. But when they do become alienated, one of the signs you're going to look for is that the child is going to start resisting contact with you persistently and consistently,
Mm-hmm.
like over time. Like not every now and then, like, oh, I want to go see my friends and I don't want to come over. And, you might think, well, my ex influenced them to do that. Well, not necessarily, because that's something
Right.
teenagers like to do, right?
Right.
Or kids like to see
Yeah.
their friends, right? But when you see that every single time you're trying to have a visit and the kid's either sick or they want to see their friends, they never want to come over. And when you ask them, they give you trivial reasons why they don't want to come over, like they say it's boring at your house, or I don't like your food, or I don't like the color of my room. I mean that's kind of the stuff that they come up with. And then when you press them, and they put themselves into a corner, right? And so when you keep pushing them about why, it escalates because they
Mm-hmm.
have to give you some reason, like,
Legitimate
well, I'm
reason.
scared at
Yeah.
your house. And they're
Yeah.
not really scared at your house, but they're starting to say that, and they're starting to now believe this story that the other parent is telling them. And if the kid goes to that parent and says, I'm scared at my dad's house, because they're trying to come up with a reason why they don't want to go over there, then what's that parent going to do? They're going to say, well, what are you scared of, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
parent can then get played, right? So they get fed into. So sometimes the child can be a actor in this, thing.
And
And
in that
kids.
case, could the child just be mad because they got divorced?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the kid could be mad. They could be upset and jealous that maybe there's a new step family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or a new baby that maybe was born, and they might get jealous of that. And this is why it's so important if you have a healthy other parent. that they don't take advantage of that and they don't let the kid try to split them, right? But an alienating parent won't do that. The alienating parent will take advantage of those things um, and kind of monopolize on them and make it worse, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so now, in a mild cases of alienation, they may not be aware that they're doing it. Like there might be they hear the kid say, "I'm nervous to go over there," and their parent says, "Well, why?" And then and so they're honestly trying to respond to the
Hmm.
child's concerns, but they should contact the other parent and say what's going on, right? But those parents don't do that, or they just trust their child and not understand that maybe their child's trying to play both teams, right? They're
Hmm.
trying, because kids are powerless in a family, and they like to try to get power. They like to control the people around them to get what they want, right? That's what kids.
Mm.
That's what all kids do, right? And so it's most parents in intact families will go and talk to each other and figure out, oh, my kid wants to go to the pool today. I told them no, so they went to you instead, right?
Yeah.
They try to
Play
they
both
try to play
sides.
off.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so the kids and a lot of alienated children later admit that they were kind of part of the game. Is what some kids even think about it. Um, but more severe alienation cases, you don't see that. It's not as much of a I tend to see that in my research in more milder cases where it's
Hmm.
not as bad. When it gets really bad, you see a lot more effortful behaviors of the alienating parent. A lot more active interference with parenting time. Allegations of abuse. Even though I will say that in a recent paper we published, not even half the cases that go to the appeal level, like meaning from the trial level to appeal level in court,
Hmm. Hmm.
not even half of them have an allegation of abuse in them. So luckily, not everybody's doing that.
Okay. Yeah.
Not everybody. Um, we don't know yet about trial level cases. Like if you just go to court and because in the United States they don't require courts to report those, and so we can't really study them very well. I'm doing a study right now in Canada where we're able to do that. So
Oh, really?
this fall, I should hopefully have some results on that. Um,
Okay.
so if you're worried about what you see in your child, like um, what red flags to look for, um, kind of the most heavily researched aspect that we look for is what we call lack of ambivalence, meaning the child starts to really have a very negative attitude towards the alienated parent and they don't really see any positives in them.
Hmm.
So most people have a healthy degree of ambivalence, like nobody's perfect, right?
Right.
I love my mom and dad, but they've got problems too, right?
Right. There's no
And
such
when
thing
your
as a
kid,
perfect parent.
no, no. But what an alienated child, they don't tolerate that. Like they can't see it. They can't hold a place in their heart for something positive for that parent because they feel that that parent hates them, right? They've been led to believe that that parent abandoned them
Mm-hmm.
and that
Mm-hmm.
they never loved them. And so of course the kid's going to feel like they've been jilted, right? And that's devastating. It's devastating
Yeah.
to lose a boyfriend or girlfriend, right? Who doesn't even give you a reason, or you
Yeah.
think that they deserted you for someone else. And that's the way these kids feel, and it's a worse feeling because they're younger and it's a parent, right? One of the closest bonds that you can have.
Yeah.
And so the kid feels very, usually they feel very angry, right? I mean, because it's, especially as teenagers, you see this, that they feel very angry at that parent because they
Mm-hmm.
feel like they, never loved them. And they will, and so another sign is this a lack of guilt where they will tell them, I never want to see you again, leave me alone. They'll say, I won't even go to your funeral if you die.
Yeah.
They'll pee on their yard. I mean, they'll run away if they see them. And that's when it gets really
Hmm.
severe, because the kids have been told to be terrified of this person and to feel like they never loved them. So the reaction is so strong to that because it's so
Yeah.
painful.
So let
Um,
me ask you, it's a one of the things that you hear sometimes when a single mother is raising, especially a son, they will say, "Well, I don't need him. I can do it all by myself." And but then the child hears, "Well, your daddy doesn't love you, or your daddy sucks, or your daddy doesn't care." And then we wonder why they have so much anger when they come into their teen years. Would
mhm.
you would you say this will be maybe part of that reason?
Yeah, I mean, and it's so it's very sad because I mean, you think about if you're a person who, it's bad enough like if you have a parent who's compromised, right? And I say this because my ex-husband had some problems, some mental health problems,
Hmm.
and my kids have to grow up with that, right? My children have to grow up coping with that, um, and it's hard enough that they have to deal with that. And I would never want to make it worse by telling them that, he abandoned them or that he never loved them or he's dangerous, even though sadly he is those
Hmm.
things. But they don't know that. They don't know that. And sadly, until he gets some help, he can still see his children, but until he gets some help, he's not able to. He has to get some
Hmm.
therapy, some
But
some
you
medicine and stuff.
but
But
you're
he would
right.
never
It's not
capitalize.
something for
But,
you to say,
right, right.
is and if they're not hearing the negativity from you, that's important. Even though
Yes,
you know it's there, you know the
yes.
reasons, but it's not something that you have to push on the child.
Exactly. And I mean, obviously, if the child, if there are safety concerns, right, you would make sure that those are there. But you don't,
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
don't have to tell the kid that. You don't have to tell them. Like you can tell them enough, right? My children understand now. They're starting to learn more about mental illness and whatnot. And but you can only kind of tell them. And I do it with the consultation of a therapist. I'm always trying to be careful to do it right and to make
Hmm.
sure I don't want that alien. I don't want them to hate their father or be afraid of him. And so there's a way to do that for children without turning them against a parent or being afraid. Because you know what, maybe by the time they get older, maybe things will be better for him, right?
Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah.
and he could maybe there might be a time they could reconnect. But what's more important about that, whether that happens or not, what's more important is that they have an identity that is part him. And if you try to tell a child that this person hates you or that they are crazy or that they are dangerous,
Hmm.
that child feels that that's who they are too.
Hmm.
And so that gets to your point is, you know, even if that was true, it's so important for children to not hear that or to understand with empathy what that parent's struggling with. And because it's part of who they are. And it's because then you have the child just really hating not only them, but they hate themselves.
Yeah.
And that it's that split, that psychological split that happens inside, that loss of identity, that they lose who they are, that is probably one of the core challenges for children, in their develop because they're developing a sense of who they are.
Hmm.
And if they can't know that piece of themselves and understand who that is and love that about themselves, they're going to be really challenged, and it affects them significantly the rest
Yeah.
of their lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of kids that you see that are angry sometimes, this is part of the reason that they've
Hmm.
been, you know, whether purposely or imperpusly alienated against another parent. And you just gotta stop. You got now, what would you tell a parent that when a even though you don't say anything, when a child, for instance, say your child, you say your former husband was has some mental issues. If your What would you say to your child when they come to you and say, why can't I see dad, or why doesn't dad come visit more or call me more or what have you?
Hmm. hmm Well, that depends on the age, right?
True, true.
And what they're able to comprehend, and how long it's been, and you know, um, oftentimes we'll say that right now they have to work on some things, right? They have some things that they're working out, and need some help. But then you reinforce that they love them, right? You
Okay.
constantly
Mm-hmm.
say they love you. They just can't be the best parent for you right now, but
Mm-hmm.
they love you. And then I will, like, I always recommend to, and it really helps at any opportunity you can see. Well, not all the time, but try to talk about them in positive ways, right?
Okay.
Like if my son says he likes something that their dad likes, I say, "Oh, your dad likes that too, right?"
Mm-hmm.
And he was really good at it, right? So kind of highlight the positives so that they feel good about that part of themselves,
I think, yeah.
because it's going to be, they already have enough to deal with the lack of that parent, but focus on why you had your child with this person in the first place. Right?
Yeah.
And every now and then talk about the good things that were there, so that your kid knows that they weren't just, I'm sure they're very confused about, like, if they're so bad, why did you have me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think, and that's so important, because they need to value and understand that there's good and bad in people, right? Or
Yeah.
or there's positives and negatives about
I
people,
think
and
that's
it's so
so.
important.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
so important.
hmm
And what would you say to a father that has a child that's been he's been alienated against? How can he rectify that? You know, that problem.
Mm. It's hard to do because it's similar to other kinds of child abuse. And right now, there are child protection services. Some places recognize parental alienation, most don't.
Mhm.
um, and so, but there are places where they're starting to recognize it, and we have a lot of scientific evidence about it. I think that that's why it's starting to be recognized. And so it's hard, because if it's mild, it's really hard to prove, right? And
Yeah.
it's because the kids, while they're with them, I mean, they're resisting contact, but when they actually do spend time with that parent, they start to enjoy their time,
Hmm.
right? It's just when they go back to mom, they can't talk about how much fun they have. Like, they have to kind of keep it hidden. They have to
Mm.
kind of keep that part of their life secret, which is a hard spot for a child to be in.
Yeah.
Um, um, I think one of the most important things is to try to make sure and get as much quality time with your kid as you can,
Okay.
um, and that's uninterrupted. If a parent's alienating the child, they will call them all the time when they're in your care. They'll text them, "Are you safe? Are you okay?" And it just, the kid can't even just
Wow.
enjoy the time that they have with this person. and
Yeah.
and there's no way to maintain an attachment with a parent unless you have time.
Okay.
um, and that doesn't mean just going out and doing things all the time. I mean, obviously, if you only have a weekend a month, you're going to want to go and do a lot of fun stuff.
Yeah.
And don't be thrown off by when they say you're Disney dad or something. But what else are you going to do if you have one
Yeah.
weekend a month? Right?
I
Yeah.
disagree with that. I agree with what you're saying. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I just disagree with the court system saying that a father can
Mhm.
really build a relationship with a every other weekend or
Yeah.
once a month
No.
and things of that nature,
Mhm.
or even
Right.
every other weekend and a dinner in the middle of the
Right.
week.
Right. Mhm.
Really, you can't build a
Yeah, that's one of the reasons
relationship.
why I became involved, and is now president of the International Council on Shared Parenting. Is I think that it's so important to push for a presumption of shared parenting, and what that means is you wouldn't recommend shared parenting typically if there's abuse. You would not do
Right.
that.
Right.
In severe alienation is
Mm-hmm.
abuse, right? This is when a
Mm-hmm.
kid is so psychologically abused they want nothing to do with a parent. um, and so, but otherwise, like if you're getting separated and divorced, if you're afraid of not of only getting one weekend a month or every other weekend a month, that's scary, because especially if you have a very strong love for your child and that's all
Mm-hmm.
you want
Mm-hmm.
facing, if you think the courts aren't going to give that to you. So then it kind of sets up this system where parents start fighting and making allegations that the other person's not as good, all as a strategy to try to be the winner. um, and so from the beginning, when you don't have that and as an assumption, and you don't value both parents, it makes it where they're more competitive with each other to try to get the child, and it creates
Yeah.
more conflict. Um,
Yeah.
and then it's just, and like there are some new studies kind of coming out showing that it can reduce conflict when you have that. It can reduce it before and after divorce. And so, I mean, we're starting to just get more and more data on that, but the
Yeah.
signs are pointing in that direction, that it's got a
Because
lot of positives.
yeah, I would love to see nationwide that when a couple goes in for a divorce, that a judge is already looking at 50-50 visitation. Then
Hmm.
you explain to me why that can't happen or why that shouldn't be. But
Exactly.
right off the bat, we're starting off at 50-50.
Hmm. Yeah.
And,
I mean,
sometimes,
most families don't have a lot of conflict. I mean, they have conflict. Obviously, they're getting divorced,
yeah,
but
yeah,
most families don't have abuse going on. Most families don't have parental alienation. So
right,
a presumption of fair parenting makes sense in my mind. So it's just when you do have those situations, yeah, then you need to come in and prove it. And you need to have good evidence about why that should
right,
happen, right?
right.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
you mentioned before we started the show that you have a new article that is coming out. And what is that? Tell the audience a little bit about that so if they want to read it, they can.
Yeah, so I've had a couple of new articles this year so far, but one of them is you can publicly access it through the end of August. And it was a review article that I was asked to write, a special issue on the topic was on isolation and separation and loss. And so I was asked to write. They selected people who are experts in the field of close relationships and families, and so I co-authored it with Doctors Mandy Mathewson and Dr. Amy Baker. And we focused on the loss that children experience due to the alienation that they may, eventually succumb to. And so it's a review of the research that we know, and also we expand a little bit on it to look at what other theories we can use to understand the processes of what's going on for that child.
Hmm.
And so it's publicly available now only until the end of August, and then it goes behind a paywall. So you have to then pay for it. But one thing I think the audience hopefully would know is that if you try to access an article and you can't get it because it's pay behind a paywall because the journal owns it, right, and you
Hmm.
can't read it,
Hmm.
you can contact the researchers themselves. There's always a contact information, usually of the authors, and they'll send you a PDF
Oh, okay.
of the article. The problem is we can't post it ourselves. Like I can't post it on to any website because it's copyright,
Right,
issues.
right.
So, but I think that's a lot of people don't know that is that you can contact the authors and get that article to read it. And
Excuse me.
so, but right now you can get that new article. But it's not just the loss that the child feels towards the parent; it's the loss of their identity, like I mentioned before. It's
Hmm.
a loss of innocence. So children are often told a lot of inappropriate information by alienating parents. They're told things about what dad did, or even
Or
though,
didn't do.
like,
Yeah.
even if he had an affair, the kid doesn't need to know about that,
No.
right? It's not going to make him a less parent or a worse parent, or
Or love that
or
child
or he didn't
less.
have any.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So there's nothing, or, oh, we're going to go to court today. The kid doesn't need to know about that. Or mom or dad hasn't paid child support. They don't need to know about that, right? So, but they're told all this information. So the kid loses their innocence. Like they lose their, just to be a child and not worry about adult issues yet. They don't
Yeah.
need to worry about those things. And that just really robs a child of it makes life so much more stressful to be
Yeah.
told things that like treated like an adult when you're not an adult, because there's not an understanding, I think, sometimes that parents have of what children are capable of understanding,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because their brains aren't done developing until 25. And so, when they're young, like 8 to 10, they don't understand, they can't do perspective taking like
Mm-hmm.
you can as an adult. They don't understand like what it's like to see things from another person's point of view.
Yeah. Now
Um,
you have
Even
a.
the most
I'm sorry.
empathetic ones. Yeah.
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 Now you have a book that you have out. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that and where they can get it and what's the book about?
hmm the book was published a few years ago, so it was at the time it was a review of the scientific research on parental alienation, and in the end, there's a few chapters where my co-author and I talk about kind of why we think, or some of the more social and institutional practices that contribute to parental alienation. And the book was kind of written as a way for me to kind of get a handle on the field, because I was new to the field of parental alienation research. I've been studying relationships and things for many years before that, but the book is kind of a way for us to kind of get a grasp of what do we know, who are these alienators, what is it doing to children, and I think it's important to understand. You can get it on Amazon. It's called Parents Acting Badly. Um, and the science has progressed even a lot more since then. I need to at some point do an update on the book, but it's a good review if you're kind of new to the area. It's written for a general audience, unlike a lot of scientific articles. But it's written more for just the everyday person to read and get an understanding of
Okay.
alienation. And
So it'll be a good book for parents to read.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And there's also some other great books I could recommend too that have been published, like self-help books, like Dr. Amy Baker on her website. She's got some great books on how to tell if it's happening, how to cope if your kid is, acting this way towards
Mm-hmm.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she also has a fantastic book called Breaking the Ties That Bind, where she interviewed children who'd been alienated when they were, or adults who were alienated as children,
Mm.
and how, like, they talk about what it was like, and how they got out of it. How did they come to realize that they were alienated? Because it's a lot like coming out of a cult.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of interesting analogies with that, and
Mm.
very close analogies to it. Because kids who have been brainwashed to believe a certain thing, they don't see that they've been influenced. Like, they
Or
don't understand it.
anything's wrong. Yeah.
No, yeah, just
Yeah.
like cult members, like they don't think anything's wrong. And so, but it's an interesting book. So she's got some great self-help books
Okay.
if you really need some more kind of self-help things. Our book is kind of like a review of some of the scientific research,
Okay.
and some of the I guess, yeah, I was interested in like how our social systems and culture, how are those influencing what we're seeing?
Yeah.
Um, my research is built on that since then. Um,
Okay.
and I could say that the scientific research on this topic is exploding. I mean, I'm writing up a review article right now of all the research that's been published, and it's not just in English. I mean, people are publishing in Brazil and Portugal and
Well, but
Quebec and
like you said,
other languages.
it's nation. I mean, it's all over. It's worldwide, and
Yep.
cultures make a difference. Because if your culture is more men are the way and they are right and they run everything, and the court system is even more looking at the man being the parent and the one to keep the child, it's going to be a different story. Yeah,
Oh
it's
yeah. Yeah, we
so
find that in Iran, for example, like
yeah,
in countries where there's Muslim law,
yeah,
or Muslim kind of, and then you can see that women are more likely to be alienated from their
yeah,
children.
yeah,
So it really depends on the culture for sure.
yeah. Well, in either
Yeah,
way is terrible, and the kid
yeah.
is the ultimately the one that's going to pay for it, and that's the worst part. But unfortunately, Dr. Harman, that is our time for today. I know we went over, but like I said, this is a subject matter that is hard to do in 30 minutes, and it's hard to
Mhm.
really just narrow it down and cover it in a short period of time. It is something that I hear a lot of fathers, because that's who I talk to a lot, but I've also heard it from mothers and seen actually fathers being the alienator. And
Mhm.
in this, either way you look at it is wrong, and either way you do it
Mhm.
is wrong. So I really wanted my audience to hear about it and talk about it, but I want to thank you for being a guest on our show today and coming on and giving your expertise in this matter. And I want to, invite you at any time when you do an article, when you have another book, whatever, let me know. And you're always welcome to come back on the show and we can talk about it in more detail.
Great.
All
Okay. Sounds
right.
good.
All right.
All right.
Well, thank you, dear.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Yes.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is our show for today. And I really want to thank Dr. Jennifer Harman for coming on the show. It has been a pleasure to have her because this is a very important topic, and especially if you're going through divorce. But as she's mentioned, it doesn't even have to happen while you're going through divorce or after the divorce. This could go on even while you're married. And so it's something that you have to pay attention to, but we really want our fathers to understand really how important you are to the child. And I want mothers out there to understand how important a father is to the child and how important it is to not bash the father. And fathers, don't be bashing the mothers either, because either way you look at it is wrong, and the only person you're hurting is your child. And eventually that's going to come back to bite you in the butt. But once again, like I mentioned earlier, if you haven't subscribed to our show, please do, and hit that notification bell so that every Saturday when we upload a new show, you'll hear about it and you can catch it. But you can watch any of our show on our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and on LinkedIn as well. And if you just want the audio version of it, we have that too on our Facebook page, LinkedIn, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Intune, TuneIn, Alexia, and other apps. So you can always catch us and you can always listen to the show and really get the information that you need so that your child can be the best child that they can be, and you as fathers can be the best father that you can be. So ladies and gentlemen, until next week, I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to again thank Dr. Jennifer Harman for coming on the show. So we'll see you next week. God bless you.